Part 1. Taylor Hawkins. He was the image people used when they talked about a modern rock drummer. Endless energy. A wide, almost childlike smile. Blonde hair flying as if the stage itself could not contain him. When the lights came on and the crowd began to roar, Taylor Hawkins looked like a man who fed on noise and motion. Behind the drum kit, he was precise without being cold, aggressive without being reckless. Every hit landed exactly where it needed to land, driving the band forward like a powerful engine that never stalled. To the public, his bond with Dave Grohl felt almost mythic. They were not framed as colleagues or business partners. They were brothers. On stage, they exchanged glances that felt private, jokes that felt improvised, laughter that looked real. It gave the impression of a band built on trust rather than contracts. Foo Fighters were presented as proof that rock music could still survive in a world dominated by algorithms and trends. Tour after tour. City after city. Long flights. Short nights. The machine kept moving, and Taylor appeared to thrive inside it. The hotel in Bogota was not meant to be anything more than a pause. A place to shower, sleep, and prepare for another massive performance. Outside, anticipation hung thick in the air. Fans gathered early, wearing band shirts, humming melodies, counting hours. Inside, the building offered polished calm. High ceilings. Soft lighting. Clean silence broken only by footsteps in the hallway. Taylor was in his early 50s. From the outside, nothing suggested fragility. He looked fit. He looked ready. He looked like someone who had already beaten his demons and come out stronger. But there was a history most fans preferred to frame as resolved. Years earlier, in London, a heroin overdose had put him into a coma. Weeks suspended between life and death. He survived, and survival became part of his legend. Recovery stories followed. Interviews framed him as disciplined, responsible, reformed. A husband. A father. A professional who had learned his lesson. The narrative was clean and comforting. Past darkness, present control. Yet recovery often demands performance. It demands proof. Proof that you are fine. Proof that you can keep up. Proof that you deserve the second chance you were given. Life on tour does not allow much space for listening to the body. Adrenaline covers fatigue. Applause masks pain. Deadlines replace rest. A rock star who cancels shows risks disappointing thousands, upsetting promoters, destabilizing an entire moving system. The pressure is subtle but constant. Be reliable. Be strong. Be grateful. Keep going. That night, something inside Taylor's body pushed back. Chest pain is not dramatic. It does not look like collapse or chaos. It feels private. Confusing. Easy to minimize. He contacted the front desk. He asked for help. The response followed procedure. A private ambulance was called. Time passed in a way that felt ordinary to the building, but irreversible to the men alone in the room. When responders arrived, the suite had already fallen quiet. The sound that once anchored stadiums was gone. Attempts were made. Protocols were followed. But the rhythm did not return. Taylor Hawkins was pronounced dead where he lay, not under stage lights, not surrounded by noise, but in a silent room meant for rest. Initial reports spoke carefully. Chest pain. Sudden death. No spectacle. Later, forensic findings complicated the story. Multiple substances were present in his system. Not framed as excess, not framed as a party. More like fragments of coping. Medication. Chemicals layered over years of strain. The most startling detail was physical, not chemical. His heart was dramatically enlarged, far beyond what is considered typical. A condition that does not announce itself loudly. A slow transformation, shaped by stress, exertion, and time. The conclusion was not a moral judgment. It was mechanical. A heart already pushed beyond its design met a combination of depressants and exhaustion. Biology reached a limit. The body stopped negotiating. This reframes the idea of the functional rock star. The one who shows up. The one who smiles. The one who never complains. Functioning does not mean safe. Success does not mean stable. The system rewards endurance, not caution. There is no applause for stopping. No standing ovation for saying no. Taylor Hawkins did not die chasing chaos. He died maintaining momentum. He died inside the version of success everyone applauds. His story exposes a question that sits uncomfortably beneath the music. Whether a performer is allowed to slow down without breaking the illusion. Whether the cost of constant motion is quietly accepted as part of the deal. Whether the person behind the symbol ever gets permission to rest. Part 1 ends with a man who did everything right on the surface and still paid the final price, and if you believe this kind of death says something troubling about how we define strength in rock music, the discussion is far from over. In the next part, the story moves from noise to silence, from a crowded tour schedule to a locked hotel bathroom, where isolation becomes the most dangerous instrument of all. Part 2, Dolores O'Riordan. Her voice did not behave like other voices. It did not simply carry melody. It cut through space, bent emotion, and left a mark that stayed long after the song ended. Dolores O'Riordan sounded ancient and modern at the same time, fragile and ferocious within the same breath. In the 1990s, she became the sound of Ireland to the rest of the world. A small figure at the front of loud guitars, commanding arenas without force, without theatrics, without apology. Millions recognized her instantly. Millions felt understood by a voice that seemed to ache and fight at once. Global success followed quickly. Albums sold in staggering numbers. Songs crossed borders and generations. To audiences, she represented authenticity. Someone untouched by artifice. A woman who looked like she belonged anywhere except inside a machine built for fame. That image became fixed. The poetic Irish singer. The brave woman who turned pain into art. The myth grew larger than the person carrying it. Behind that myth was a long, grinding internal war. Dolores lived with bipolar disorder. Periods of intense clarity and energy gave way to stretches of crushing darkness. Depression did not arrive dramatically. It settled slowly. Quietly. Childhood trauma followed her into adulthood, resurfacing in moments when the noise stopped. She spoke openly at times, trying to give language to what she lived with, but openness did not equal relief. Awareness did not mean protection. By the time she arrived in London, nothing about the trip suggested danger. It was not an escape or a breakdown. It was work. Studio sessions. Creative planning. The kind of routine movement touring artists rely on to stay grounded. The hotel was discreet, elegant, designed to protect privacy. The sort of place meant to feel safe. That night, she called her mother in Ireland. The conversation was warm. Casual. She sounded fine. She sounded present. There was no alarm in her voice. No coded goodbye. No signal that something was wrong. This detail matters because it removes the idea of intention. There was no visible spiral. No dramatic collapse. What followed was smaller. More ordinary. More dangerous because of its familiarity. Hotel rooms are controlled environments. The temperature is right. The bed is made. Everything is within reach. Including alcohol. The minibar sits quietly in the corner, stocked and waiting, requiring no effort, no explanation, no witnesses. For someone in recovery, it is not temptation announced loudly. It is temptation offered politely. Dolores drank. Not with a crowd. Not in celebration. Alone. Champagne. Spirits. Enough to blur judgment without erasing routine. She was also taking prescribed medication for her mental health. Medication meant to stabilize, to soften extremes, to help her function. Alcohol does not announce how it will interact with such medication. It simply multiplies effects. Sedation deepens. Awareness dulls. Signals slow. At some point, she decided to take a bath. This was not reckless behavior. It was intimate and normal. She put on her pajamas. She was preparing for rest. The detail strips the moment of drama and leaves only vulnerability. A woman alone in a quiet room, seeking comfort in warm water after a long day. The combination of alcohol and medication took over silently. There was no struggle. No panic. Consciousness faded. Her body slipped beneath the surface of the water without resistance. In a luxury hotel overlooking London, one of the most recognizable voices in modern music disappeared without a sound. She was found later when she failed to check out. Staff entered the room and discovered her in the bathtub. Emergency services were called, but time had already passed. The inquest that followed was careful and restrained. Toxicology results showed high alcohol levels alongside prescribed substances. There were no signs of violence. No evidence of intent to die. The official conclusion was clear. Death by misadventure. A tragic accident. This legal language matters. It resists the narrative people often want. It does not allow a clean moral or a dramatic arc. It forces the truth to remain uncomfortable and ordinary. A mistake. A miscalculation. Chemistry turning lethal in a private moment. After her death, fans searched for meaning. Some reached for the familiar trope of the tortured artist. The idea that pain fuels brilliance and brilliance demands sacrifice. But this story does not support that romance. Dolores did not die creating art. She did not die making a statement. She died alone in a room designed to isolate traveling musicians from the world. Hotels function as temporary shelters, but also as sealed boxes. No family. No routine. No external anchors. Silence becomes amplified. For someone living with mental illness, isolation does not need drama to become dangerous. It only needs time and privacy. Her children lost their mother. Her band lost their voice. The world lost a sound that cannot be replaced. What remains is not a lesson wrapped in inspiration, but a warning about how quietly things can go wrong when support systems dissolve behind closed doors. Part 2 leaves behind applause and noise and asks whether the myth of the suffering artist has blinded us to the risks of isolation, and if this story unsettled you in ways that are hard to name, it likely will not end here. The next part moves to a city built on excess, where control and caution finally collide with a lifestyle that refuses to slow down. Part 3, John Entwistle. John Entwistle occupied a strange position in rock history. He did not leap across stages or smash instruments. He did not shout for attention. He stood still. Almost motionless. Yet everything depended on him. While chaos exploded around him, his bass lines held the structure together. Fast. Precise. Unforgiving. He turned an instrument meant to sit quietly in the background into a lead voice with weight and authority. This was why he earned the nickname the Ox. Not because of excess on stage, but because of endurance. Strength. Reliability. Within The Who, he was the anchor. Keith Moon attacked the drums like a storm. Pete Townsend slashed the air with windmill chords. Roger Daltrey commanded the front like a preacher. Entwistle stayed planted, absorbing the impact, translating disorder into something coherent. For decades, that balance defined the band. Remove any one part and the structure collapsed. By the early 2000s, history itself had become pressure. The reunion tour was not nostalgia. It was an event. A financial engine. A legacy moment. Tickets sold instantly. Promoters invested heavily. Fans expected proof that the band could still deliver. Las Vegas was chosen as the launch point, a city built on excess and symbolism. Bright lights. Endless noise. No room for weakness. The Hard Rock Hotel was designed for legends. Memorabilia on the walls. Music in the air. A place that celebrates the mythology of survival through indulgence. John checked in on the eve of the tour. He was in his late 50s. Wealthy. Famous. Still working. Still expected to perform at full force. His body, however, had been sending quieter messages. He had heart disease. High blood pressure. Conditions that demanded caution and medication. This was not speculation. This was known. Doctors had warned him. Prescriptions existed for a reason. But decades of living as a rock icon distort perception. When you survive the wildest years, survival itself begins to feel like proof of invincibility. Slowing down feels unnecessary. Dangerous, even. As if rest might signal surrender. That night, restraint did not win. Alcohol flowed. Cocaine appeared. Not in spectacular quantities. Not in a way that screamed loss of control. Enough to matter. Enough to be fatal. The chemistry of the situation was simple and brutal. Cocaine constricts blood vessels. It accelerates the heart. For a healthy body, this is already risky. For a heart compromised by disease, it is catastrophic. The setting was intimate. A hotel room. A woman he had met that evening. No crowd. No entourage. No witnesses who understood the stakes. At some point, John lay down. Sleep followed. His heart, already strained, entered a state it could not recover from. Morning arrived quietly. Late. When the woman beside him woke, something felt wrong. His body was cold. He did not respond. Panic followed, but panic cannot reverse biology. Emergency services were called. Attempts were made. There was nothing to bring back. John Entwistle was pronounced dead in his room. The official findings were direct. A heart attack triggered by cocaine in a body already compromised by heart disease. Not an overdose in the sensational sense. Not collapse from excess alone. A final stress placed on a system that could no longer adapt. News spread quickly. Inside the same hotel, his bandmates were preparing for rehearsal. Instruments were tuned. Schedules were set. And then the message arrived. Another member of the original rhythm section was gone. Keith Moon had died decades earlier under similar shadows. Now the anchor was gone too. What followed remains one of the most debated decisions in rock history. The tour did not stop. After a brief pause, The Who hired a session bassist and stepped back on stage. Music filled arenas only days after John's death. Pete Townshend explained that stopping might mean never starting again. That John would have wanted the music to continue. Some fans accepted this as tribute. Others saw it as something colder. A business choice. A refusal to allow grief to interrupt momentum. This is where the story shifts from personal tragedy to ethical fracture. Does honoring an artist mean continuing without them, or stopping because of them? Is music stronger when it absorbs loss and moves forward, or when it pauses to acknowledge what was taken? In an industry where tours cost millions and contracts bind tightly, the line between necessity and indifference becomes hard to see. John Entwistle became a symbol of that question. A man who spent his life holding chaos together, only to be carried away by the very lifestyle the myth celebrates. He was not reckless on stage. He was disciplined. Focused. Professional. Yet professionalism did not save him from biology or from habits formed in earlier decades. His death exposed the cost of believing that legends do not age. That experience replaces vulnerability. That past survival guarantees future safety. The ox did not fall because he was weak. He fell because the machine around him never required him to stop being strong. Part 3 leaves behind a body found too late and a band that chose to keep playing, and if this decision feels unresolved or troubling, it is because the next story pushes the question even further, into territory where death itself becomes part of rock mythology rather than an interruption to it. Part 4, Graham Parsons. Graham Parsons never behaved like a man who planned to stay long. He moved through music the way a drifter moves through towns, leaving traces rather than foundations. Born into wealth, he rejected inheritance and comfort without hesitation. He chased sound instead. Country, gospel, soul, rock. He stitched them together into what he called cosmic American music. Others would later call it country rock, but for him it was not a genre. It was a belief system. His talent was undeniable, but his stability was always fragile. Friends described him as gentle, funny, deeply wounded. Loss followed him early, carving a hollow space he tried to fill with music, substances, and movement. He did not trust permanence. He trusted feeling. And no place stirred feeling in him like the desert. Joshua Tree was not a destination to Graham. It was a church. He believed the land held answers. Vast silence. Jagged rocks. Endless sky. He would drive for hours, sometimes under the influence, sometimes simply lost in thought, convinced that meaning lived somewhere between the stars and the sand. When he stayed there, it was always the same place. A modest motel. A familiar room. Nothing luxurious. Nothing distracting. That room saw him often. It saw his rituals. Music playing softly. Bottles within reach. Drugs treated not as danger but as tools for exploration. On a September night in the early 1970s, the pattern repeated one final time. Alcohol flowed freely. Morphine followed. The combination overwhelmed his body. Friends nearby noticed something was wrong. Attempts were made to wake him. Cold compresses. Panic. Improvised solutions born from confusion rather than knowledge. He was taken to a hospital, but there was nothing medicine could reverse by then. Graham Parsons was declared dead in the early hours of the morning. The official cause was overdose involving morphine and alcohol. He was 26 years old. Another name drifting toward the infamous 27 Club, though he never reached the number. Under ordinary circumstances, the story would have ended there. A body released. A funeral arranged. A grieving process defined by family and law. But nothing about Graham's life had ever followed ordinary paths. And his death would not either. Months earlier, at another funeral, Graham had made a drunken pact with his closest friend and road manager, Phil Kaufman. They promised each other that whoever died first would not be buried in a suit, in a cemetery, under rules they despised. The survivor would take the body to Joshua Tree and burn it, releasing the spirit into the desert. At the time, it sounded like dark humor mixed with intoxication. After Graham's death, Kaufman treated it as a sacred obligation. Complications arose immediately. Graham's stepfather planned to have the body flown to Louisiana for a traditional funeral. There were rumors of inheritance disputes. Control over the body meant control over the narrative. Kaufman saw this as a violation of everything Graham stood for. What followed crossed from grief into legend. Kaufman borrowed a hearse. He obtained forged paperwork. Along with an accomplice, he went to the airport in Los Angeles where Graham's body was being prepared for transport. Through confidence, deception, and timing, they convinced authorities that the coffin needed to be redirected. The casket was loaded into the hearse and driven away. They headed straight for the desert. Night fell. Wind moved across the rocks. Near a formation known as Cap Rock, Kaufman stopped. The coffin was removed. The lid was opened. Goodbye was spoken. Gasoline was poured inside. A match was lit. The fire burned fast and bright, a sudden blaze against the dark landscape. Flames rose into the desert air. When it was done, Kaufman and his companion fled. By morning, park rangers found charred remains. An investigation followed. The story shocked the country. A rock musician stolen from an airport and burned in a national monument. Yet the law had no language for it. There was no specific crime for stealing a body. Only the theft of the coffin itself. Kaufman was eventually fined a small amount and released. The body was gone. The pact, in his mind, fulfilled. This is where Graham Parsons stops being only a musician and becomes a myth. His death was not just an end. It was transformed into a final act. A desert cremation. A rebellion against burial. A refusal to be claimed by family, law, or tradition. Fans still visit that motel room. They leave flowers. Bottles. Notes. They speak of feeling him there. But mythology complicates grief. Was Kaufman loyal, honoring a wish spoken without clarity? Or was he reckless, violating dignity under the banner of friendship? Does a person's desire about their body outweigh the rights of family? Does death belong to the dead, or to the living who remain? Rock culture often celebrates defiance, even in death. Fire. Freedom. Refusal. Graham Parsons fit that narrative too perfectly. His end became inseparable from his art. A life lived on the edge, concluded in flames under desert stars. Part 4 leaves behind a question with no stable answer, and if this story feels less like tragedy and more like ritual, it may be because the next chapter shifts from mythic loyalty to something colder, where death is neither sacred nor symbolic, but lonely, hidden, and painfully close to home. Part 5, Paul Gray. Paul Gray was known to the world through a mask. On stage, he looked monstrous. A pig mask. Dark jumpsuit. Violent sound. The image was designed to intimidate, to overwhelm, to turn chaos into spectacle. With Slipknot, the music was loud, aggressive, relentless. It spoke about rage, trauma, and alienation in a language that felt confrontational and raw. Fans saw danger. Outsiders saw menace. Behind that image lived a very different man. Paul was quiet. Polite. Sensitive. Friends described him as gentle and thoughtful, someone who listened more than he spoke. The mask was armor, not identity. It allowed him to release pain without explaining it. But armor works only while it is worn. When it comes off, everything it holds back rushes in at once. By the end of the first decade of the new century, Paul stood at a fragile crossroads. He was about to become a father. His wife was pregnant. A future was forming that demanded stability, presence, and honesty. At the same time, years of touring had left him with chronic physical pain. Neck pain. Back pain. The quiet damage that comes from endless travel and performance. Painkillers had once helped him function. Over time, they became something else entirely. Psychological pressure layered over physical discomfort. The responsibility of impending fatherhood collided with fear. Fear of failing. Fear of being seen at his weakest. Fear of letting his family down by admitting he was struggling again. Relapse rarely announces itself as desire. It arrives as relief. A way to quiet anxiety. A way to stop thinking. Paul did not want to use at home. He did not want his wife to see him in that state. He did not want to contaminate the space where a new life was about to begin. So he chose distance. Not across cities. Not across states. Just far enough. A suburban extended stay hotel, minutes from his own house. Close enough to return. Far enough to hide. The hotel was ordinary. Neutral colors. Generic furniture. No luxury. No character. A place meant for people passing through or waiting for something to change. Paul checked in alone. That room became his bunker. Inside it, he could separate the man he was becoming from the habit he could not let go of. He used morphine. He used fentanyl. Substances known for their power and unpredictability. He injected himself. The moment likely felt familiar. Warm. Coming. The anxiety softened. The noise receded. He lay down, possibly intending to rest briefly before returning home. Sleep came quickly. Too quickly. His body could not handle the combination. Years of use had already strained his heart and respiratory system. The drugs slowed breathing. Oxygen dropped. The line between sleep and unconsciousness disappeared. Paul Gray never woke up. Time passed without interruption. No one checked on him. No one called. The room remained sealed. Eventually, a hotel employee entered for routine reasons. What they found was silence and stillness. Needles were present. Pills were scattered. The scene was not dramatic. It was painfully quiet. Emergency services confirmed what had already happened hours earlier. Paul was gone. The official determination was accidental overdose involving morphine and fentanyl. The word accidental does not mean harmless. It means there was no intention to die. Only an intention to cope. The shock rippled outward. Slipknot held a press conference without masks. Faces exposed. Voices breaking. Grief was visible and raw. Paul's wife sat beside them, pregnant, carrying a child who would never know her father beyond photographs, stories, and music. The contrast was unbearable. Life beginning next to life ending. As the investigation continued, attention shifted toward the medical system that had supplied some of the drugs. A physician who had prescribed large quantities of painkillers to multiple patients who later died came under scrutiny. Charges were filed. A trial followed. Arguments were made about responsibility. About intention. About oversight. In the end, the doctor was acquitted. The verdict did not resolve the discomfort. It only sharpened it. Where does responsibility lie in an epidemic built on legal prescriptions, personal vulnerability, and chemical dependency? Is the provider at fault? The system? The patient? The disease itself? Paul Gray's death illustrates relapse not as failure, but as a symptom. Addiction does not disappear with success, love, or upcoming milestones. It waits. It adapts. Shame keeps it hidden. The fear of disappointing loved ones drives it underground. Paul did not choose isolation because he wanted to be alone. He chose it because he wanted to protect his family from seeing him broken. The tragedy is proximity. His home was minutes away. His support system was close. Yet the wall of silence addiction builds was stronger than distance. Help existed, but asking felt impossible. Paul Gray left behind music that helped millions process their own pain. He also left behind a warning about how quietly relapse can happen, even when life appears to be turning toward hope. His mask terrified audiences. His absence devastated everyone who knew him. Part 5 closes with a man hiding from his family in order to spare them, and if that contradiction feels painfully familiar or unresolved, it is because the next story moves from secrecy to public humiliation, where shame is no longer private but broadcast to the world, with consequences just as final. Part 6, Rob Pilatus. Rob Pilatus became famous faster than he became real. With Milli Vanilli, he was presented as the perfect product of late 1980s pop culture. Stylish. Charismatic. Beautiful. Songs topped charts across continents. Awards followed. Stadiums filled. On the surface, it looked like the ultimate dream. Inside, it was a carefully engineered illusion. The music that made them stars was not theirs. Their voices were not on the records. They were performers, faces chosen to sell a sound created by others. When the truth surfaced, the fall was instant and brutal. The Grammy was taken back. Interviews turned hostile. Late-night shows turned them into punchlines. What had been celebration flipped into ridicule overnight. The scandal was framed as entertainment. Audiences laughed. Headlines mocked. The world decided they were frauds rather than human beings caught inside a system built to deceive. For Rob, the damage went deeper than reputation. His identity collapsed. He had wanted to be a real artist. Instead, he became a symbol of embarrassment. Fame did not simply disappear. It inverted. Attention remained, but it carried contempt instead of admiration. That kind of exposure does not fade quietly. It burns continuously. Shame followed him everywhere. Work vanished. Money dried up. Relationships fractured. Substance use escalated from coping into dependence. Alcohol. Pills. Anything that could soften the noise of being recognized only for failure. His behavior grew erratic. Arrests. Public incidents. Attempts to regain control that ended in deeper loss of dignity. Each headline reinforced the same message. You are a joke. You are finished. Yet even in that collapse, a fragile thread of hope appeared. A second chance was offered. A comeback album. This time, with his real voice. No tricks. No illusions. Just proof that he could sing, that he had always been more than the lie. Studio sessions began. Songs were recorded. For the first time, Rob felt close to reclaiming himself. The album represented redemption, not success. Validation rather than wealth. But redemption requires time, and Rob was already exhausted. Years of humiliation had eroded resilience. Addiction had weakened his body. Confidence was brittle. On the eve of what should have been a turning point, he checked into a hotel in Frankfurt. Alone. No celebration. No entourage. Just a room and his thoughts. Alcohol was present. Prescription medication followed. Substances that promised rest, silence, relief. He had been seen earlier that evening appearing unstable, emotionally fragile, already drifting. At some point, he returned to his room. What happened next was quiet. There was no public scene. No dramatic gesture. Just a combination of chemicals taken by a man whose body and mind were already overwhelmed. He was found later, unresponsive. Time had passed. The details offered no clarity about intent. It was never definitively established whether the ingestion was deliberate or accidental. The outcome was the same. Rob Pilatus was dead in a hotel room at the age of 32, just as his chance to be heard in his own voice was about to reach the world. The album was never released. It was shelved. Buried along with the possibility of rewriting his story. Fab Morvan, his former partner, survived to carry the weight alone. Public reaction shifted briefly from mockery to shock. Sympathy surfaced too late to matter. The narrative changed again. From villain to victim. From punchline to cautionary tale. Rob's death exposed the cruelty of celebrity culture when illusion collapses. The industry created a lie, profited from it, and then abandoned the people inside it when the truth became inconvenient. The audience participated willingly. We laughed. We repeated the jokes. We consumed the humiliation as entertainment. His legacy is uncomfortable because it offers no clean villain. Was it the producers who engineered deception? The media that amplified ridicule? The public that demanded spectacle? Or Rob himself, unable to survive the stripping away of identity? When fame is taken, what remains if no one is allowed to be ordinary again? Rob Pilatus did not die at the height of excess. He died at the edge of redemption, weighed down by years of public shame that no apology could erase. His story suggests that ridicule can be as destructive as neglect, and that losing dignity in front of the world leaves wounds that do not heal quietly. Part 6 ends with a man's silence just before he could finally speak for himself, and if that silence feels heavier than the scandal that preceded it, the next chapter moves deeper into addiction's long memory, where survival itself becomes the most dangerous illusion of all. Part 7, D.D. Ramone. D.D. Ramone built punk from the gutter up. His writing did not decorate reality. It documented it. Street corners. Hunger. Paranoia. Need. The songs moved fast because the lives they came from moved fast. Short verses. Blunt lines. No distance between experience and expression. He did not invent rebellion as an idea. He translated survival into sound. Within the Ramones, he was the engine. The count-off. The relentless pace. The phrases that felt too honest to be safe. Heroin was not a rumor in his lyrics. It was material. A presence that shaped days and nights, fear and focus. The drug appeared not as glamour but as routine. Fans later mistook that honesty for romance. They heard danger and called it authenticity. They heard suffering and called it art. Decades passed. Many around him did not make it. Sid Vicious. Johnny Thunders. Others disappeared early, swallowed by the same cycle. D.D. lived. He aged. He toured. He published books that spoke openly about addiction and recovery. He described attempts at sobriety with blunt clarity. For a time, it looked like escape. He talked about getting clean. He talked about learning how to live without the needle. Survival itself began to look like proof. Recognition arrived late but loudly. The Ramones were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Validation after years of neglect. Cameras flashed. Applause roared. D.D. stood at the microphone and delivered a speech that sounded like triumph wrapped in irony. He thanked himself. He laughed. The moment became legend. Fans saw confidence. Defiance. Closure. What they did not see was how heavy the silence felt after the lights went down. Applause does not cure memory. Awards do not erase craving. The habits formed in youth do not dissolve because a ceremony says you are important now. D.D. left the stage and returned to a life without routine, without anchors, drifting between places that felt temporary. He lived in Los Angeles with his wife, moving through days that lacked structure. The adrenaline of performance was gone. The chaos that once fueled writing had no outlet. Isolation crept in quietly. Not dramatic. Just empty hours. Addiction does not always announce relapse with spectacle. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits for boredom. The idea that he had beaten it became a trap. Friends believed he was safe. Fans believed he was a survivor. DD himself may have believed it too. But tolerance changes. The body forgets how much it once needed. What once sustained becomes lethal. On a warm evening in early summer, he was alone in his apartment. The space functioned more like a rooming house than a home. Sparse. Temporary. A place to exist rather than live. He obtained heroin. Whether this was a long-hidden pattern or a sudden return remains unclear. What matters is the moment. Preparation. Injection. The familiar ritual. The lights dimming faster than expected. There was no crowd. No celebration. No audience. He collapsed where he sat. Breathing slowed. Consciousness slipped away. The drug he had written about for decades delivered its final line. His wife returned later and found him. The scene told its own story. A syringe. A bowl of water. Objects that needed no explanation. Emergency services were called, but the outcome was already sealed. D.D. Ramon was pronounced dead that evening. The official cause was heroin overdose. News traveled quickly through the punk community. Shock mixed with resignation. Many had feared this ending for years. Others felt betrayed by hope. How could someone who survived the worst years fall now, after recognition, after apparent recovery? The irony was sharp. He endured the most dangerous era only to die during the quiet one. The loss hit harder because it felt avoidable. Not in a moral sense, but in timing. He had lived long enough to be honored. Long enough to see his influence acknowledged. Long enough to imagine a different ending. Addiction does not negotiate with legacy. DD's death forced an uncomfortable reckoning. Punk culture often celebrates destruction as truth. Pain as credibility. Fans praise artists for living what they write. But when living the lyrics leads to dying from them, celebration becomes complicity. The image of the self-destructive genius offers permission rather than warning. Art did not require his suffering to exist. The songs were already written. The influence already established. What remained was the myth, and myths rarely include responsibility. They repeat patterns because repetition feels authentic. D.D. Ramon is buried among icons at Hollywood Forever Cemetery. Fans visit. They leave notes. They quote lyrics. They speak of freedom and rebellion. The ground does not answer. The story stays unresolved. He survived the storm and drowned in calm. He outlived his peers and lost to the same force at the end. The lesson is not that talent invites destruction, but that survival demands maintenance, not applause. Part 7 closes on a man who convinced the world he had outrun his past, and if that illusion feels fragile, the next chapter shifts to someone crushed not by survival, but by success itself, where a single song becomes a cage and escape arrives too late. Part 8, Yanni Lane. Yanni Lane was introduced to the world as a symbol of excess. Big hair. Loud hooks. Glossy videos. In the era of glam metal, image and volume mattered as much as melody. With Warrant, success arrived fast and without restraint. One song in particular eclipsed everything else. Cherry Pie became unavoidable. Radio. Television. Arenas. A chorus engineered to stick, to sell, to define a moment in popular culture. The band rode the wave as it grew higher and louder, and Yanni stood at the center of it, smiling for cameras that never asked what the song cost him. The success was massive. Too massive. Cherry Pie did not just open doors. It closed them. It reframed Yanni as a caricature, a party mascot rather than a songwriter with ambition and depth. He wanted to be taken seriously. He admired writers who were introspective, vulnerable, timeless. Instead, he was frozen inside a single image. The joke followed him everywhere. Interviews reduced him to the song. Audiences shouted for it even when he tried to move on. The more it paid the bills, the more it hollowed him out. Resentment grew quietly at first. He spoke about it with humor, then with frustration, then with something closer to despair. Being known for one thing can feel like erasure. The public hears joy. The artist hears a cage. When the industry moved on from glam metal, the joke turned sharper. Trends shifted. Attention faded. But Cherry Pie did not fade. It lingered, reminding him of what he could not escape. Alcohol became a solution that asked no questions. It softened memory. It blurred anger. It filled hours that no longer had a stage to anchor them. Drinking was not a headline. It was routine. Over time, routine became dependence. Relationships suffered. Opportunities slipped away. Reunions promised hope and delivered disappointment. Each attempt to reclaim dignity ended with the same chorus echoing back at him. By the final years of his life, the contrast was stark. The men who once filled arenas drifted between small rooms and temporary arrangements. There was no entourage. No spotlight. Just the quiet humiliation of being recognized for a song he wished he had never written. On a hot summer day, he checked into a budget motel in Woodland Hills. Not a destination. A hiding place. The kind of place chosen when you want to disappear without traveling far. The room offered nothing romantic. Neutral walls. Basic furniture. Silence broken only by passing traffic. Bottles came with him. Vodka. Prescription sleeping pills. Tools for forgetting. There was no audience. No dramatic farewell. No note left behind. The intention was not performance. It was numbness. Alcohol accumulated in his system beyond what the body could manage. Breathing slowed. Organs failed quietly. Yanni Lane was found later, alone in the room, fully clothed, as if rest had simply gone too far. The official determination was acute alcohol poisoning. No suicide note. No declaration. Just the outcome of a long relationship with escape. The detail matters because it strips away spectacle. This was not a public collapse. It was a private ending shaped by years of unresolved bitterness and fatigue. News of his death reframed the past overnight. Fans mourned. Tributes softened the jokes. Former bandmates spoke with regret. Many admitted they had underestimated him. Cherry Pie returned to playlists, now carrying a different weight. A song written to be fun became inseparable from a life that ended in sadness. Joy on the surface. Erosion underneath. His legacy remains conflicted. On one hand, a hit that defined an era. On the other, a cautionary tale about being trapped by success that refuses to evolve. The phrase one-hit wonder follows artists like a sentence. It implies simplicity. It ignores the cost of repetition. It forgets that artists are allowed to change their minds about their own work. The deeper question lingers. Does an artist owe gratitude to a creation that feeds them but erases them? Can success be harmful when it replaces identity? Is it fair to demand that someone celebrate the very thing that became their prison? Yanni Lane did not die because he wrote Cherry Pie. He died because he could not escape what the world decided that song meant about him. The industry rewarded the hook and ignored the human. When the spotlight moved on, the hook stayed behind like a scar. Part 8 ends with a melody everyone knows and a man few truly understood, and if the contradiction sits uncomfortably, the next chapter leaves the motel and travels to a sunlit resort where a quiet night reveals that even survival and respect cannot outpace the body forever. Part 9, Gary Moore. Gary Moore never needed spectacle to prove his power. His reputation lived in fingers, not headlines. To musicians, he was untouchable. A player who could bend a note until it felt like a voice breaking, then turn around and attack the fretboard with surgical speed. Blues, hard rock, metal. He moved between styles without asking permission. Technique was never decoration. It was language. Those who understood guitars understood him immediately. Outside that circle, his name carried less noise. American media rarely framed him as a god, even though many American guitar heroes borrowed directly from his phrasing and intensity. He was respected, not mythologized. Admired, not marketed as excess. That distance mattered. It allowed him to age without chasing caricature. He kept working. Kept touring. Kept recording. No comeback narrative. No collapse arc. Just continuity. By the early years of the new decade, Gary Moore was not a man in decline. He was productive. Focused. Planning new material. Revisiting the blues with renewed patience. He had survived trends, survived changing tastes, survived the exhaustion that ended many careers early. He decided to take a break. A holiday. Spain offered warmth, calm, and distance from the damp intensity of Northern Europe. He checked into a luxury hotel on the southern coast. Palm trees. Sea air. Quiet evenings. There was no visible crisis. No reports of erratic behavior. No warnings. He was with his partner. They ate. They drank moderately. Witnesses later recalled nothing unusual. He was relaxed. Present. The image was not of a man running from something, but of someone enjoying a pause earned through decades of work. That night followed an ordinary rhythm. Drinks at the bar. Conversation. Laughter. He returned to the room and went to sleep. No chaos. No conflict. No last stand. Just rest. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, his heart failed. Sudden. Complete. His partner woke to silence that felt wrong. Attempts to wake him failed. Emergency services arrived quickly, but there was nothing to reverse. Gary Moore was pronounced dead in his hotel bed. The shock came from its simplicity. There was no scandal to unpack. No substances to sensationalize. Toxicology reports showed alcohol in his system, but no illegal drugs. No overdose narrative. No hidden vice revealed. The official cause was a heart attack. Massive. Final. Medical examination painted a familiar picture to anyone who understands cumulative damage. Years of touring. Years of physical exertion. Long nights. Alcohol used as routine rather than escape. Stress that never fully shuts off. None of it dramatic in isolation. All of it significant over time. The heart records everything. It does not forget. It waits. His death challenged expectations because it offered no villain. No cautionary tale shaped like a headline. No clear moment where everything went wrong. The tragedy lay in accumulation. The slow tax paid by a body pushed hard for decades, even when the pushing looked disciplined and controlled. Reactions poured in from across the music world. Fellow guitarists spoke of him with reverence. Many admitted they had studied his phrasing obsessively. Some said he was the best they had ever seen live. Fans left pics and notes at his grave. Quiet gestures for a quiet giant. Gary Moore's story resists the myth that rock deaths must be loud to matter. He did not burn out. He did not implode. He simply reached the end of a physical limit. The absence of scandal does not reduce the weight of loss. It sharpens it. Because it reminds us that discipline does not equal immunity. That respect does not stop biology. That talent does not negotiate with arteries and muscle. There is something unsettling about a death like this. It offers no easy lesson. No behavior to condemn. No warning sign we can point to and say that is where it began. The only conclusion is uncomfortable. The body always keeps score. It adds quietly. It collects patiently. And when payment is due, it does not announce itself. Gary Moore poured emotion into every note he played. He gave listeners something that felt endless. But the vessel carrying that gift was finite. His passing strips away the illusion that only excess kills. Sometimes longevity itself becomes the risk. Part 9 ends without noise or scandal, and if that kind of quiet ending feels more unsettling than the chaos before it, the final chapter tightens the circle one last time, returning to a hotel room where timing alone turns an ordinary night into the cruelest possible ending. Part 10, Bobby Hatfield. Bobby Hatfield was never framed as dangerous. His legacy rested on control, precision, and emotional restraint. A voice that climbed without strain and held notes long enough to feel eternal. Unchained melody did not rely on shock or speed. It relied on breath, timing, and trust. Trust that the singer could reach the note and stay there without breaking. For decades, Bobby did exactly that. Night after night. City after city. His career was long, steady, and respected. With the Righteous Brothers, success did not arrive as a sudden explosion and fade. It endured. Audiences aged alongside the music. The crowds grew calmer. The venues grew quieter. But the expectation never changed. People came to hear that voice do the impossible one more time. Bobby understood the responsibility. He treated performing as a duty, not a thrill. Show up. Deliver. Leave nothing unfinished. By the early years of the new century, he was a veteran. A grandfather. A man whose wild years were assumed to be long behind him. Touring was routine. Familiar hotels. Familiar schedules. Familiar conversations. The pressure was subtle but constant. Do not cancel. Do not disappoint. Do not let age show. On the night everything ended, the setting was unremarkable. A Midwestern city. A sold-out show. Fans already finding their seats. Instruments waiting under stage lights. Bobby was in his hotel room, resting before the performance. He had done this ritual thousands of times. Meet in the lobby. Drive to the venue. Sing. Repeat. Time passed. His partner, Bill Medley, waited. Bobby did not appear. This was not like him. He was punctual. Reliable. Concern grew quickly because experience teaches you when silence is wrong. Calls went unanswered. Knocks brought no response. With the help of staff, the door was opened. Inside, the room was quiet. Bobby lay on the bed, still, as if sleep had simply deepened too far. There were no signs of struggle. No chaos. No dramatic scene. Emergency services arrived, but their presence was procedural. Bobby Hatfield was pronounced dead in the room, minutes before he was supposed to walk onto the stage and sing one of the most recognizable songs in history. The shock moved outward immediately. From the hotel to the theater. From backstage to the audience. Bill Medley had to step onto the stage alone and explain that the show would not happen. That his partner, his other half, was gone. The applause turned into confusion, then silence. At first, the assumption felt logical. Age. Natural causes. A heart finally stopping after a long life of work. Obituaries followed that narrative. They praised his voice. His professionalism. A peaceful passing. It sounded neat. Acceptable. Weeks later, the medical report disrupted that comfort. Toxicology revealed cocaine in his system. Enough to matter. Enough to stress a heart that could no longer tolerate it. The official conclusion was acute cocaine toxicity leading to fatal cardiac arrhythmia. The detail stunned those who thought they knew him. Bobby was not a young rocker chasing chaos. He was in his 60s. He was supposed to be past this chapter. The revelation forced a reconsideration of assumptions. Addiction does not respect timelines. Habits formed early can remain dormant without disappearing. Pressure does not vanish with age. It shifts. Why he used that night remains unknowable. Some speculate about energy. About nerves. About old routines resurfacing under familiar stress. Performing demands intensity. Even for someone whose style appears calm, the body prepares for battle. The heart races. The breath shortens. The focus narrows. Substances that promise control can feel tempting, even late in life. The tragedy lies in timing. He was not found after a long absence. He was found minutes before fulfillment. A lifetime of discipline undone in the final stretch. The image is unbearable because it collapses the distance between preparation and loss. Bobby Hatfield's death shattered the idea that stability guarantees safety. It exposed a quieter truth. That performers carry expectations long after youth fades. That the demand to deliver perfection does not retire. That the body ages, but pressure remains ageless. His voice remains immortal. Recordings preserve what the night could not. But recordings do not breathe. They do not tire. They do not feel fear before stepping on stage. Bobby did. Until the end. Part 10 closes the circle with a man who did everything right for most of his life and still fell to a force he was thought to have outgrown, and if this ending challenges what you believe about age, discipline, and survival in music, the conversation does not end here. The stories are finished, but the question remains whether the industry ever truly allows its legends to rest before the cost is paid.